Austen, and her topic will be Austen Passports, the Pacific and Beyond. Ruth, you may take over, please.
Hopefully you can all see what I'm doing now. Hopefully everyone's with me. Is that right?
We can see and hear you perfectly. We're good.
Great. And you can see my screen. Great. Kia ora tēnā koutou katoa, mai aho o Otipoti Aotearoa. Ko Ruth Williamson, aho I o Tautahi I te Waipunamu. He mema hua no JASNA e rima pe nato. E he mema aho no JASA nike atu I te rua tikauto. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand, New Zealand, where I speak to you from Otipoti, otherwise known as Dunedin, the Edinburgh of the South, where we are closer to Antarctica than we are to Hawaii, where at least some of our hosts today are based. I'm delighted to be part of this event as a member of both JASNA and JASA. The Australian Society was established in 1989 and has celebrated the life and work of Jane Austen ever since. JASA is, of course, based in the Southern Hemisphere on the Pacific Rim, close to Asia and the South Pacific. And hopefully now you'll see a map that shows you our area. JASA's headquarters are in Sydney, marked by the large red blob, and most JASA members do live in Australasia, far from the places that Austen herself knew. But we really do enjoy connecting with those who appreciate Austen regardless of location. In my own case, I've been a member of JASA for well over 20 years, and the Society has introduced me to so many others who share an ongoing passion for all things Austen. So I've been able to make friends in Australia, as well as at home here in New Zealand, in Canada, the US, the UK, and elsewhere, and all because of JASA. Since 2017, I've been the editor of JASA's Chronicle, that is our newsletter for members. And we like to include as many events and items with an Austen flavour as we possibly can. One of the very first suggestions made to me by Susanna Fullerton, our president, who will be talking to you a little later, was that we think about celebrating Austen's following in places that don't have the obvious language and historical links that are part of a largely British heritage. And that was the seed of an idea. Next, I had to come up with a concept and a series of questions for our first column. I really wanted to underline its international nature by way of a kind of passport template like this one. As everyone will probably know, every passport features personal details about the holder, plus an image, and of course it identifies nationality. And I decided to call the item Austen Passports, the idea being that Janeites all over the world belong to a global community of enthusiasts, all linked by an interest in Jane Austen. Back in 2017, we adapted a simplified passport framework. So every contribution we have begins like this, with these details you see on the left of the slide. And you'll see there are one or two extra additions that aren't usually in your passport, relating to how long you've been a fan of Jane Austen, etc. It's also been our practice to include the national flag for each contributor to help to identify their particular nationality and location in the world. For our first example, which we published in December 2017, we looked to Europe and to a lady called Josje Rurken in the Netherlands. And of course, the Netherlands is a very long way from where JASNA is, but that was no disadvantage as far as this project was concerned. Susanna emailed José about the project, and we were absolutely delighted when she agreed to take up our challenge. I sent her the brand new template together with a series of questions. So please meet José. We began by asking her how she discovered Jane Austen. And she told us that while she could have chosen to read Pride and Prejudice at college, she did not actually do so. It was 2005 when she first encountered Austen's work at any proximity, and that happened at the movies. While she was feeling really pressured by the daily demands of life with every single day packed full of so much to do, she went to watch the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice at the cinema. And she was so drawn into the story, the images and characters, that she completely forgot her troubles. And that night, instead of being sleepless through stress, which was happening quite a lot, she, I quote, thought about Mr. Darcy, immediately felt happy and fell sound asleep. She really felt that Mr. Darcy had changed her life. She immediately bought a copy of Pride and Prejudice in book form and soon discovered there were 5 other Austen novels and many more film adaptations of her work. José wanted to know everything about Jane Austen's life and work. And by diving into Austen's Regency world, her novels and her letters, José emerged from what was a difficult phase in her own life. And not only that, but she was also inspired to spread the word. For her 50th birthday party, she wore full Regency dress and she gave her first presentation about the life and work of Austen to her guests. The party was held in a cinema. So José used the big screen to show clips from adaptations while she told Austen stories. Her immersion in all things Austen continued when she attended a 3-week summer school on the subject at King's College in London. Since then, apart from the times of COVID, José has visited the UK every year to study and to learn more. She's also set up what she calls Austen Tales, because telling stories about Austen is her passion, and she can share her growing knowledge with others. Naturally, she's visited many places in the UK with Austen associations, as well as the sites most of us have heard of, like Chawton, Bath, Lyme Regis, and Winchester. She's also seen film locations, such as at Lyme Park, Chatsworth, Sudbury Hall, and many more. She's crossed the Atlantic to New York, where she was thrilled to be able to hold 4 original letters written by Austen herself in her very own hands while she was visiting the Morgan Library. So we asked José to tell us why she feels so drawn to Jane Austen. She marvels at how Austen's work remains so vibrant and witty after 200 years, and that as a very young writer, Austen already knew how characters like devious Lady Susan can impact others. José also detects proto-feminist hints in the novels, and she says every reader has met a Mr. Collins, a Lady Catherine de Bourgh, or a Miss Bates in real life. It doesn't matter where you live. Those aspects of personality are universal. Of course, Austen wrote in English, not Dutch, but because her name is so well known, José has found an enthusiastic audience at home. She accompanied a Dutch garden tour group to the UK, where they visited Austen-related sites like this one at Chawton House. There's also a thriving Jane Austen Society based in the Netherlands. So thanks to Yoshe, we had made a simply splendid start on our series. And now we had a general format we could tailor for each of our participants. We didn't want to focus on one continent alone. So we moved on to consider other countries, and that included those in the Pan-Pacific and beyond. So in mid-2019, we were able to feature an Austen enthusiast in Japan. Now, I know we've just heard from another enthusiast from Japan, so I'm going to focus on our contributors' individual experience. We approached Ayako Otomo, who had already spent time in both Australia and New Zealand, including 5 years at Otago University here in Dunedin. When aged only 17, she completed her secondary or high school education in Australia. She had already studied American English for 4 years in Japan. At school in Australia, she heard her friends talk about how one of their English teachers, one with feminist sympathies, always wanted to teach Jane Austen's novels. Ayako didn't know why that might be, and she became rather curious. And that was in the later 1990s, at a time when the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, the one with Colin Firth, was being broadcast. She decided she would try that Austen work first. She read it both in English and in a Japanese translation, purely for pleasure. She continued on to tertiary education and came to New Zealand as a graduate student. At Otago University in the 2010s, her primary focus was music study, and she specialised in playing the 18th century harpsichord. For her own enjoyment, she also attended presentations about Austen, often run by Professor Jocelyn Harris, who's so very well known to JASNA and to JASA as well. Ayako went on to a staged reading of Lady Susan, which was done in full period costume. In effect, she took every opportunity to enhance her knowledge of Austen while in Australasia. At JASA's 2018 conference, which I think was in Canberra in Australia, Jocelyn was presenting a paper. She and Ayako met up again, and of course, new friends were made. Ayako commented that she really appreciated talking with others who were so knowledgeable about Austen's works and in other fields. Back in Japan, after nearly 15 years away, she now has friends and colleagues who specialise in English literature, so they can share ideas when they get together. Ayako's also noticed that perspectives on Austen's works can vary among people from different backgrounds. Well, unfortunately, COVID put paid to a JASA conference in 2020, and Ayako had planned to take part in it. She does hope that will be possible in future. In the meantime, the pandemic in Japan has required her to work from home, like so many of us everywhere, and she's presently teaching English in Tokyo. So what attracts her to Austen's writing? She says it's the witty way Austen depicts the nuances and complexity of human emotions. While it may be a cliche to say so, it's true that many Japanese readers do feel that way. Ayako points out that the famous Japanese author Soseki Natsume praised Austen highly for that very reason. Because she's a musician familiar with 18th century European music, Ayako's always fascinated by those scenes in Austen where music's being played or sung, such as the Bennet sisters do in Pride and Prejudice, and also the way so many encounters amongst characters take place in the ballroom. She observes that many of the songs of the period allowed the performer to express emotions openly that would have been, in the context of conversation, much too direct. Music acted then and now as a kind of social language. And Ayako feels that sounds and feelings of that period come to life in Austen's works. So moving on now and leaving Japan on the Pacific Rim, I'm going to move a little further afield over the Indian Ocean to the subcontinent. Social media platforms promote Austen's following in countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. Of course, many of us will have seen Bollywood-style films like Bride and Prejudice, and some may know popular Austen-based fiction by writers from South Asian backgrounds. In December 2019, we featured an Austen passport by Salmaya Guntur from Hyderabad, shown here on the map, and she is the founder of the Jane Austen Society of India. Salmaya is very active in her role, and she has global connections in the world of Austen. Her group provides a platform online for presentations from places as far afield as Denmark and Ontario, Canada. The group operates on social media, which is a real advantage in times of COVID. Salmaya's own first contact with the works of Austen was when she was just 13. In a cupboard, she found a novel with a somewhat yellowed cover, and on the cover was a picture of a girl wearing a hat and lost in thought. This book was new to Salmaya. Its title was Emma. She was surprised to see the word handsome used to describe women as well as men. And she was also struck by a sentence she read saying that women tended not to write letters after getting married. She recalled that sentence later when she heard her father confirm that in India, women tend to be occupied with their marital home and they don't keep such frequent touch with their mother's family. A year or two after finding Emma, Salmaya watched the Bride and Prejudice movie and thought it was extremely funny, but she didn't actually connect it back to Pride and Prejudice. Her real introduction to that novel came when there was a rerun of the BBC TV series, the one with Colin Firth, long after it was made. She was hooked, and she became even more of a Mr. Darcy fan after watching Bridget Jones's Diary. She didn't realise then how much that film owed to Pride and Prejudice because she was still learning that Austen's plots are universal. She explained that many urban Indians read Austen's novels at school, and some study them in almost every Indian college. Salmaya read Emma closely again when she was studying for her master's in English literature, and then she understood how it could be that it could actually be set in modern India. So she believes that Austen's novels are not just fiction, they remain true today. In India, she says, there are many Wickhams. Darcys are rare, unfortunately, but you can find Elizabeths and Lydias. Now Salmaya sees such characters everywhere around her, whether in Bollywood or in real life. And she knows Jane Austen wrote the blueprint for so many modern love stories. As an Indian, Salmaya recognises just what Jane observed in her time, demanding a dowry, as Wickham did. That still happens in India, although the government has actually banned the practice. Another parallel is the way young people or their guardians in Austen's time spotted prospective brides and grooms at balls. And this happens today at famously large Indian weddings. As in Austen's novels, a marriage in India is not just between two people, it's between two families. Arranged marriages do take place, and that happens after consideration of both families' lifestyles, their economic status, even DNA, as well as the astrological birth charts of bride and groom. Such factors may help to suggest whether the couple would be happy together or not. And cousins can still marry each other in many Indian cultures, just as they could in England during the Regency era. Austen's world has shown Salmaya that many experiences are universal. And for her, the best part of being a Janeite is the international community that comes with it. She's made friends in her society and with amazing women, she says, from all over the world, because Jane Austen wrote about what she saw in her society, and many women now identify with what she saw. Salmaya regards Austen as a feminist before the term was invented, someone who created strong female characters who give others the hope and belief to forge ahead in life, despite the difficulties they face. Salmaya's Indian society fosters contacts with the neighbouring Jane Austen Society of Pakistan, established by Laileen Sukira, and JASNA, via the Southwest region involved today, has hosted contributions from popular novelists like Sonali Dev and Sonia Kamal. More and more writers from the subcontinent have an international following. And now to look across the other side of the Pacific towards the Americas. I heard about a Janeite in Brazil through JASNA itself. In 2017, Maria Bioli, I'm sorry if I've murdered your name, Maria, but we both attended JASNA's AGM in California, where we presented individual breakout sessions. We missed making direct contact there, but I did remember Maria in 2020 when we were thinking about an Austen passport contribution to come from South America. Maria researches and teaches Austen in Campinas, Sao Paulo, where there is limited knowledge of English literature and of Austen's real significance. When she was in her second year of university study, Maria and her class watched Sense and Sensibility, the movie adapted by Emma Thompson. A long and interesting class discussion followed about sensibility in the 18th century and how Austen's novel addressed the idea. Maria was impressed despite knowing nothing of Austen, but she thought she'd seen the name somewhere before. A few years earlier, she'd been given a collection of international literary classics and read some titles, but not all. So after the sensibility discussion, she checked her collection and found Pride and Prejudice. It was in a Portuguese translation. She read it immediately and liked it, but that was it. It was months later when she found English language editions of Austen's novels by chance. She reread Pride and Prejudice, and she was hooked by Austen's sharp style and irony. After reading all 6 novels in English, she wanted more, but she couldn't actually find editions of the Juvenilia or of Austen's letters to buy. And this was before online sources and international shipping were available. It was also difficult to buy screen adaptations, and she found a copy of the 1995 BBC Pride and Prejudice series while actually in Paris, browsing in a bookstore. Austen's screen adaptations, both old and new, only really reached Brazil in numbers after the success of the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie release. In the 2010s, Austen's popularity boomed there. Today, there's a Jane Austen Society of Brazil, and publishers have taken advantage of Austen's higher profile. There are many more Portuguese translations available now, and they are improving all the time. Austen's rising fame was even reflected in a homegrown adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, which included characters from her other novels too. It was developed into a Brazilian soap opera in 2018, and it was called Pride and Passion in Portuguese, and it ran for 162 episodes. Brazilians really do love soap operas, and this one was a hit. The downside, Maria says, is that Austen's now associated with screen adaptations of the 2000s and 2010s and regarded as a writer of naive romances. The current conventions of Regency romantic films have set a kind of frame through which new generations are understanding Austen in Brazil, and they're influenced by movie scenes such as proposals made in pouring rain, which of course never happen in the novels. English literature is not usually taught in Brazilian schools, so there is little, if any, formal analysis of Austen's work in them, whereas schools in Anglophone countries often introduce a critical process for reading literature, especially English literature, to their students. So most Brazilian Austen fans today admire her because of romance plots, and only later are they introduced to her irony and social criticism, if at all. Maria herself is intrigued by the duality between Austen's popular appeal and her high ranking in the English literary canon. She was able to turn this duality into research. She's studied and written about Austen's current popularity by analysing fan fiction, which is a phenomenon she discovered while in the USA in 2008. Back in Brazil, some academics, usually men, she says, are somewhat condescending about Austen's writings and dismiss Maria's choice of subject. But she persists, and she says studying Austen is indeed the delight of her life. Through Austen, she's met wonderful people around the world. In Canada, where she conducted part of her doctorate research, at several JASNA AGMs and at other conferences. This year and last year, 2020, she's been teaching online instead of on campus because of the huge impact of COVID in her country. As a future project, she hopes to translate Austen into Portuguese. The language presents some challenges for the translator, but Maria is very keen to tackle them. And now for our most recent Passport article. This year, we return to the Asian side of the Pacific. In Indonesia, Dia Agustin now lives and works in Jakarta, the capital city, marked here on the map. And she also has an interest in translations of Austen because she's completed work of that kind. She was working as a managing editor for a major Indonesian publishing house when Austen's Emma fell into her lap because an Indonesian translation was to be published. At that time, back in 2014, classic English literature was not her favourite genre because she felt somewhat intimidated by its style and its lengthy descriptions. Emma also happens to be Austen's longest novel, and she'd never read Austen before and had only watched one film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 movie featuring Keira Knightley. So somewhat reluctantly at first, she began her journey to Hartfield, Donwell Abbey, and the neighbourhood. She got to know Emma Woodhouse and Mr. Knightley, and by the time she finished reading Emma, she was really pleased and proud of herself because unexpectedly it had become fun. After Emma, she read all Austen's major novels, and she went on to compile some of Austen's famous quotes into a collection and published it under the title A Fair Lady and a Fine Gentleman in 2016. She also loves Austen's Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice, but Emma remains her personal favourite. She finds much to like about the character of Emma, who admits that she does wrong and tries to reform. Dia thinks Mr. Knightley is a perfect match for Emma because he's so perceptive and he doesn't hesitate to reprimand her when she goes wrong. Because of reading Emma, Dia has continued to read and appreciate more classic literature, and she's thankful that Emma showed her the way. In Indonesia, readers who enjoy classic English literature are rather hard to find. On the other hand, romance novels are popular. So Austen's Pride and Prejudice is one of the best-selling novels in the country. So here you see how it's presented in its Indonesian version. Currently, Dia participates in a book discussion and reading challenge regularly about classic novels, and that takes place online. She has friends in a Bookstagram community, which is, of course, an Instagram account dedicated to books. And they sometimes read classics. They discussed Emma in November last year and Pride and Prejudice a month later. They talked about the characters' personalities and the cultural background. There was intense debate about Mrs. Bennet, who treats her novels, and I quote, like commodities that need to be sold immediately, end of quote. Dia hopes Persuasion or Sense and Sensibility will soon become subjects for the group. She always recommends Austen's novels to any reader who would like to try classic literature because she says it has many topics Indonesians can relate to, such as how society regards mature single women or how family plays an important role in marriage decisions. Dia says Austen's themes remain universal, for even in modern times, some things never change. Indonesia has, of course, been severely affected by the pandemic, and Dia continues to promote reading, especially of Jane Austen. And now it's time for me to quickly sum up. Our contributors have had a number of experiences in common. They often come to Austen later than those in an English-speaking culture. And they discover Austen's work, sometimes by reading her novels, but also through a screen adaptation that's made a strong impression. Third, Austen's reputation in some countries has been coloured by romantic adaptations and popular tastes in romance. Her social messages, her wit and style are picked up much later. Fourth, those who admire Jane Austen can face barriers to being taken seriously because of those who dismiss her as just a popular romantic writer. And fifth, all our contributors say how valuable they find contact with like-minded readers everywhere, whether it be in person, in groups, online, or at conferences. So if you think about it, those observations do also apply everywhere in English-speaking cultures as well as elsewhere. So what's different about these other cultures? It's not only different languages, but it's the local perceptions of what the novels say. Once readers, including our contributors, have discovered how Austen resonates for their own society, their understanding and appreciation deepens. Now, Jess is very keen to continue with our Austen Passport series in the Chronicle, so please do contact me at this email address if you would like to be a subject, or you can suggest a potential candidate for a future Austen Passport. We'd just love to hear from you, and we'd love input from many more enthusiasts, such as perhaps from Singapore, other places in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. And I understand there's a Philippine representative going to talk to us today. Also, anyone from the West Coast of South America or Central America, and many other places too. Please do feel free to contact me. Kia ora mō tō tono, mai kia korero a koe e tēnei rā. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. First is, who is your youngest passport holder and oldest, or what are their ages?
Oh, there's quite a range. I think our oldest would probably be an academic gentleman from Spain, who, and yes, we do have had a male contribution, if people were going to ask about that. It's you don't have to be female to take part. It's the way of things in the Austen world. So I think he would be well in his 50s, and the youngest would be only just out of her teens.
Great.
So the full range.
You also talked about how in some places there's condescension for people who are Austen fans. Jocelyn Harris had a question though. Are there any countries where Austen is really actively resisted?
Well, we haven't had contributions from perhaps those countries where communication's most difficult. I do wonder if it would be easy for someone in Iran or Iraq to make contributions, or even Afghanistan too, looking at their current situations. You know, doors are opening, but it takes a very long time. And I think the kind of condescension I was talking about really related to people having the wrong idea of what Austen's work is like. It's not all pretty dresses and lavish houses. And that perhaps is the impression we might get from watching movies only. Once people read her novels and see how much more there is to them, that condescension tends to dissolve.
Right. Liz Velazquez Cooper had a comment that Maria, one of your passport holders, was supposed to give a talk at the AGM in Chicago, but she's recorded a short version of her talk, and that will be on the AGM on demand coming up on the Brazilian soap opera topic. So that'll be
fantastic.
something
Wonderful.
be great to look forward to that.
Well done, Maria.
And I think those are our only questions. And that's it. Thank you so much. So we're going to take, yeah, thank you so much. We'll take a quick break and come back at 6, well, sorry, 5 minutes from now, whatever time zone you're in, multiple time zones. So about 5 minutes and we'll be back.